Welcome to Technovation. I'm your host, Peter High. I'm pleased to welcome to this broadcast Michael Newcity. Michael is the Chief Innovation Officer and President of ArcBest Technologies. He's been with ArcBest since 1993 and held a range of roles, including Director of Economic Analysis, Chief Financial Officer, CFO and CIO at the same time prior to taking on his current set of responsibilities in early 2015. ArcBest is a logistics and supply chain company based in Fort Smith, Arkansas, with a bit more than $3 billion in annual revenue. But first, a word from our sponsor, QuickBase, and the company's Chief Executive Officer, Ed Jennings. QuickBase is a low-code application development platform focused on citizen automation, and Ed wanted to share how the company helps organizations democratize automation. Ed, over to you.
At QuickBase, our mission is to unlock the potential of organizations to adapt and innovate at speed. We do this by empowering business technologists within organizations to leverage low-code, no-code to visually build their own applications, click and drag integrate across their existing systems, and eliminate manual and clumsy processes by writing their own workflow automations. As we see more technology responsibility shifting to the business, here are the top 3 ways that CIOs can unlock the potential of their own businesses to adapt and innovate faster. 1, empower a culture of innovation where every member of the team feels responsible for building and innovating digital solutions. 2, build a practice of citizen automation in your company. Build out governance frameworks and communities of practice. And 3, equip the team with the right citizen automation tools. My name is Ed Jennings, and I'm the CEO of QuickBase. I look forward to sharing how we've helped over 5,000 enterprises mature their citizen automation programs.
And now for a word from our partner, Zoho, and the company's president, Timothy Casby. Prior to taking on his current role, he was the chief information officer of a number of companies, including Reliance Industries, Sears, Intrexon, and the Warehouse Group. He's now at Zoho, a most unusual enterprise software company, and wanted to share some perspectives from it. Timothy, take it away.
Yes, Peter. Even before COVID hit, most savvy private equity businesses were looking for recession-proof companies as their targets, or businesses that are thriving in the fourth industrial revolution, meaning those that are blurring the lines between physical, digital, and biological spheres. We at Zoho are positioned to help CIOs blur the physical and digital divide. Be it serving your customers, we provide marketing, sales, and support solutions. Or running your operations, we provide HR and finance tools. Or empowering your people, we provide powerful business intelligence, collaboration, and communication tools. Or for building differentiation, we provide business process optimization, low-code and no-code platforms to deliver apps faster. Learn more on how Zoho enables CIOs to thrive in the fourth industrial revolution at zoho.com.
Thanks, Timothy. And now on to the interview. Michael, it's great to see you today. Thank you so much for joining me on Technovation.
Thanks, Peter. It's great to be here.
That's my pleasure. Well, let's begin with a description. I offered a description in brief of ArcBest. Maybe you could talk a little bit about ArcBest and also the part of ArcBest Technologies that you're the president of. Talk a little bit about the two sides of the house, if you would.
Yeah, sure, Peter. So ArcBest, we're as you said, we're in the logistics and freight transportation space, and our focus is really on trying to make it easier for our customers to do business. We combine reliable shipping capacity with technology, with trusted advisor relationships to take the complexity out of the supply chain. One thing that you'll hear about our organization is that we're very values driven, and it's at the core of who we are, who we hire, how we work. And so as you said, I serve as the Chief Innovation Officer for ArcBest and the President of ArcBest Technologies, which is a wholly owned technology subsidiary of ArcBest. The innovation role is really focused on transformative innovation in the organization with a 5 to 7 year horizon. The role is new to ArcBest as of 2015, and I feel like the work that's linked to it is just now coming online. And so I'm very excited about what's happening in that area. ArcBest Technologies is nearing just under 500 tech and analytical professionals. It's focused on the traditional information technology function, as well as data science, operations science. We have an engineering group that's focused on research and development around the operational elements of freight operations. And so it's really a great group of highly engaged and creative employees who really understand technology as well as the freight transportation and logistics business.
That's a great overview. Thank you so much for sharing that. You mentioned that as Chief Innovation Officer, a role that was new 6 years ago when you took on the post, a little more than that even, focuses on transformative innovation. Can you provide some examples of what constitutes transformative innovation in your world?
Absolutely. So when we think about transformative innovation, we're talking about things that might bring net new revenue, things that might bring a significant operational enhancements to the organization. One example of that is around CX. Last year, we implemented what we call a dynamic LTL pricing program. It provides our shippers with faster, simpler, more accurate pricing without negotiating a published price, which is very typical and traditional in the less than truckload industry. But it also has a positive environmental impact by reducing what we call empty miles, or the number of miles that we're moving empty or near empty equipment for repositioning purposes. Dynamic pricing uses machine learning to predict current market prices and then ultimately provides a much simpler process that's tailored to each customer. It allows ArcBest to capitalize on our existing asset-based LTL network availability and then the market insights so we can offer the right price on every quote at the right time. And the program also allows new customers to be onboarded more quickly, which is part of that flexibility aspect. So that's just one data-driven example of how I view transformative innovation in the organization.
And talk a bit about the team that you lead, or the teams that you lead, perhaps on the two sides of your set of responsibilities. How are each organized, please?
So, yeah, that's a great question. So when I came into the role, and really started planning for the role when I was CFO and CIO, I was working with the leadership team at ArcBest Technologies, trying to think about how to re-envision that organization. And one challenge that we saw, and this is probably typical in other larger IT organizations, is that you have a single CIO that is very responsible for the end-to-end information technology spectrum. And we really felt like we wanted to kind of break that apart and have, so our CIO, who reports up to me, is focused on systems and software development, all of the software and systems that our employees use and that our customers use. There's a PMO that's under that individual as well. And then our CTO is focused more on the traditional infrastructure, cybersecurity, help desk, technical services roles in the organization. And that person speaks to the board once a year on cybersecurity topics, does a quarterly report on cybersecurity topics for the organization. So that's how we kind of split up the traditional information technology role. And then we rolled in the economic analysis group, which is a group of folks that have masters and PhDs and math or other related areas, and that forms our data science group. And then the last group is our R&D group, and these are folks that are engineers, master's level, PhD level engineers, and they're focused on the physical devising around supply chain technologies, things like when we get into things like RFID or IoT or tablets or freight moving devices. And so they progress that function for the company.
Very dynamic. And how is the team? Is most of the team in Fort Smith, where you are today, and where the firm is headquartered, or is it distributed across multiple parts of the country or world?
So that's a great question, Peter. So one of the things that we did coming into the changes in 2015 is, our history is really about developing most of the software we developed in-house, 95% of that software in-house. And we realized that we need to do that anymore. that we wanted to maintain a high level of customization in the software development, have a capacity to do that. But we also realized that we needed to source externally. We needed to create more variable capacity in the organization across all those areas I just mentioned. And so for folks that do work directly for ArcBest, we have an office, our main headquarters for ArcBest Technologies in Fort Smith. We have two other offices, one in Plano and one in Medina, Ohio, through acquisitions. It's much smaller groups, very vital to the organization. And then we've got probably on the range of about another 100, 125 employees that are contractual through different relationships, and they're, as you can imagine, they're spread across the globe.
Very interesting. I couldn't help notice that when you were describing the roles that roll up to you, economic analysis, you used to be a director of that. Information technology, you used to be the CIO. You are the first person to hold this set of responsibilities, as you noted. To what extent was your past experience in these other roles? Did it sort of bring you the perspective that there was value in bringing all this together to have it work perhaps in a more concerted effort than had traditionally been the case?
I think one of the things that really I got seasoned on, well, I'll speak of that from two perspectives. One from the finance, the CFO role perspective, and one from the director of economic analysis role. I've always felt that a strong source of our IP, our competitive advantages could come through how we understand and use data. That really got ingrained in me 15 years ago. And so I really wanted that to be a much stronger component of the organization. And really when we rolled in the economic analysis group into ArcBest Technologies 5 years ago, the group was 18 to 20 people. Today, that group is over 100 people, 50 direct employees, and 50 that we work with through partners, through one primary partner in sourcing that talent. And so that's been a phenomenal change, because really their work product is being absorbed by all the other areas across the traditional information technology groups, across R&D. So that's been a very strong add. The other thing I'd say on the CFO role is I really wanted to change the way we looked at the technology budget. I wanted to bifurcate it. And so today, the view is that we have a very strong view, a very good view of how much of our tech spend is what we call just run the business, keep the lights on spend. And then how much of it is going toward systems development, R&D, and other things. And I wanted to treat that budget like a portfolio and have it very tightly aligned to our strategy and to the initiatives of the company. And we've been very successful on that. And so when you look at that spend, which is about 45% of our total tech spend, it's aligned to every initiative on our strategy map. It's got a ROI component hypothesis. It's got project management resources. It's got executive sponsorship, tactical leadership assigned, and we evaluate all of those through an investment committee that meets on a regular basis to understand that portfolio of investments and how they're trending and how they're paying off and how they're progressing. And so when I think about ArcBest Technologies, it's yes, one part infrastructure, run the business, but it's very much a portfolio of technology investments.
Very interesting. And if I'm doing my math correctly, if 45% of the portfolio is on these transformative aspects, the systems developments, the R&D, and so forth, it would mean that the run the business, the other part of the dichotomy that you set up, is 55%, and that's a very healthy percentage that is focused on the new things, developing the new. I'm curious, as somebody who has run technology for some time, what are some of the methods that you use in order to decrease the percentage of spend on run the business in order to provide you the flexibility and capability to focus so much of your attention and ultimately your budget on new innovative things?
I think, coming into the role, I didn't know how that played out. We did not have the benchmarks. In 2015, we did not have the benchmarks to really understand where we sat. We used an outside consultant to help us understand how those various run the business metrics, those benchmarks lined out. Because I was very convinced that if we could show the business that our run the business spend across various metrics was in place, either at or below industry benchmarks, that gave them a reason to stop kind of focusing on that element and focusing more on the investment pool. And that's exactly what happened. We weren't starving those areas, but we came into the right place that was that at or below the benchmarks. And I have to be honest, Peter, I didn't have anything to do with that. That really predates me in the role. We had a team of technologists that average tenure 13 to 15 years with the company. There's been a discipline on cost control for many years. Back when ArcBest Technologies was formed in the 1960s, when you're working in a kind of a lower margin business, that has that kind of effect on these other areas. And so we just, today, when you look at our infrastructure, it's a very pragmatic perspective. We look at things on-prem versus cloud. It's really just the best technology for the price, for the function. We don't get caught up in the hype of emerging tech. We evaluate it carefully. It doesn't mean we ignore it. We don't ignore it. And so we want to understand it, but we also don't run to things when we don't understand the full potential and the value of it. So I'd say we're in a really good place from an infrastructure perspective. And some folks might come in and say, well, you're a bit outdated over here or there. And we'd say it's just part of the whole infrastructure and it works for the business.
I'm struck, Michael, not just this conversation, but our prior ones as well, at how progressive this business seems to be in terms of its use of technology. You talked about how the sanctity of data was something that was burned in your brain years ago. And there are many organizations that are much more recently come to that conclusion and maybe don't even yet have a data strategy in place. So new is that discipline in a lot of organizations. As you mentioned, for years now, even predating your time in technology, clearly had a progressive point of view of making sure that as you were developing your technology, it's not growing or ballooning to a point where it dominates. The run the business aspects of technology dominate to such an extent to decrease the flexibility you have to focus on the new and do new things for your company, for your company's customers and so forth. I wonder if you could take a moment to reflect the extent to which there are some insights that you can share on how the orientation of this organization to be so progressive in its thought process around technology.
Yeah, on the data side, it's interesting. It takes me back. I remember back in 2003. It was back when the KPI dashboards was a big thing, and we'd rolled out a KPI dashboard, and it had key performance indicators. Had 15, and then it grew to 20, and then it grew to like 500. And we realized it became a kind of an all performance indicators dashboard, and we needed a different technology infrastructure for that. And I had to go. I was a director at the time. I wasn't even an officer in the company, but I had to go out and sell this concept of having a centralized resource for dashboarding, for reporting, for data. And what we back then, data was very siloed. You had every department that was kind of doing their own thing around data and reporting. And I had to convince them, let's hold off on that. Let's pool resources. Let's go to a common platform. And the vision also was that we could have something that was usable not only for the officers, not only for the management team, that they could be on the same platform that a supervisor on a freight dock could be in looking at his or her metrics. We wanted something that could work up and down the whole organization. And at the time, there weren't vendors in the market to support that kind of vision. We didn't want to have people worrying about inner and outer joins that weren't working in IT to manage their data within such a reporting framework. And so we did. We spent 3 years and we completely redid the data architecture for the organization, and then redid the front end and built our own BI platform for the company. It's still in place today. We do have other products that we've added on since then, knowing that that's not our core competency. But what I think that did, though, Peter, is that the takeaway is this: we've been successful in being able to sell these concepts, these end-to-end concepts, these game-changing concepts to the functional side, the business side, and cast that vision. And they've been participants in that process. And so I think that's key as you're trying to progress these kind of initiatives.
I think it's a very interesting perspective. I appreciate you sharing those. Absolutely. Yeah. I also wanted to ask you, as I alluded to earlier, you've had, I prior to the recording, I was joking that there's some people who have the same job in many different companies. You've had many jobs in the same company, and I reeled off some of the most recent anyway. And gosh, what an interesting set of chief roles you've had, from chief financial officer to CFO and CIO together. I remember joking the first time we ever met when you had those two roles that the CFO is usually the bane of the existence of the CIO, and you were the same person for a little while. I could only imagine you were frustrating yourself perhaps, but and now Chief Innovation Officer, President of ArcBest Technologies, as we've been talking about. I would love to understand. I know you've got a technical background from your undergraduate days. You also have an MBA, which no doubt built business acumen. You also have meandered, and I mean that in a great way, meandered across this organization into different disciplines, really expanding your aperture of responsibilities, no doubt understanding of how value is created across this organization. I wonder if you can reflect on this really remarkable and unusual career path that you've had.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for the question, Peter. I do like reflecting on that. I started off in the organization really on the customer side just as a programmer back in 1993, and we were working with software-based technologies on a disk for customers to be able to track freight and do other things. And that really, what that led to was me being able to kind of lead our e-commerce initiative back in the mid to late 1990s. And that really opened up my eyes to, because at the time, what was happening there was most organizations were focused on transferring their marketing materials. They just viewed the web as a new marketing resource for transferring printed materials online. And our organization had this vision of let's bypass that step and go straight to allowing customers to use these internal, even green tube type systems to track freight and create bills of lading and do rate quotes and many other things. And we'll put a web front end on these technologies. We had to write custom piping to get that to work with a mainframe. And so, but it really opened my eyes to a number of things. It opened my eyes to our customers in the industry. It opened my eyes to the fact that we didn't have to rely on just off-the-shelf systems to innovate and do things. We could bypass some steps. The data side was very fascinating to me, and that really moved me into that next role, which was in economic analysis, where I led that group. That group had its own pioneering days when the industry deregulated in the 1980s. I wasn't involved in, of course, but they adopted activity-based costing, very data-driven approach. It was new, but we needed something as the industry was deregulated. I got to be a part of that when I took over the area in the 2000s, and so very related to the finance function as well. The activity-based costing group did a lot of ad hoc analysis in that group. We did a lot of analysis for the executive team, kind of almost like an internal management consulting group, doing a lot of analytics. And I got an MBA along the way while I was in that group. And then when Judy McReynolds became the president and CEO in 2010, she was the previous CFO. She was a traditional CFO. we were in a situation where we had just come through the Great Recession in 2010. We'd lost quite a bit of money, and we realized that we needed a different strategy for the company. And she asked me if I wanted to do the CFO role as a non-traditional CFO, but really focused on the strategy for the company and diversification for the company. I'd had the background with customer work and e-commerce. I'd had the background with economic analysis and its connections to finance, and data. And so that was an exciting time, and we worked through that for 4 or 5 years. At the same time, in the organization, there was a growing concern about how we were managing technology. We knew we wanted more out of technology. We'd made a lot of good technology advancements throughout the years, but it really wasn't being what I would say being managed in a modern way. And so I took the CFO and CIO hat on, as you said, and it was a challenge. And we realized very quickly that it was probably too much, and just the needs of the CFO, the needs of the CIO. And we kind of had a conversation. Judy had a conversation toward the end of 2014 and said, "Hey, what do you want to do?" And I said, we worked with an outside consultant, and we said, let's focus on innovation. Let's rethink ArcBest Technologies completely as an innovation arm for the organization. We'll bring IT together with data, with R&D, with operations science, and we'll treat it like a portfolio of investments and align it to the strategy. And so that's kind of the course, Peter.
That's fantastic. And can I ask you again? I made the joke, though I still find it interesting. CFO and CIO. There have been a number of combinations. I'll talk on the CIO side, which is a discipline I know particularly well. There have been a number of things that have been combined with that. Chief Innovation Officer, in fact, shared services of various kinds. Chief Technology Officer, Digital Officer, Data Officer added on to the CIO set of responsibilities. Right. As I mentioned, CFO has though less so today. For a long time, it was the primary kind of boss of the CIO. And I wonder if, having grown up with a bit more of a financial background, a technical background as well, but having been most recently and even previously, quote unquote, just the CFO, how that oriented you differently in taking on the CIO role?
Yeah, I think from my perspective, what I was really trying to, that whole year being CFO and CIO, I really took an exploratory role as CIO. ArcBest Technologies had a president, and he reported up to me in that process. And so it was being run as an organization. And so I took an exploratory role, that's how I treated that position. And, I'd say one thing here is that might have been threatening to the leadership team at ArcBest Technologies, and it wasn't. We've got a very strong culture in this organization of working together, working through issues, being on a team together. I've been here for 27 years, and I've known many of these people that I was leading for a long time, and so those relationships really helped us work through that. And I learned a lot that year, and they were telling me things that they wanted to do as well, that maybe never had the right person in place to get that off the tarmac. And so that was a great year to rethink how we could do technology. And it was toward the end of the year, putting that all together and seeing the roadmap. We really planned out a roadmap that was probably a 3 to 5 year roadmap for ArcBest Technologies. And then we began executing on that when I came over in a full-time capacity.
Very interesting. Well, as you look to the future, Michael, what trends excite you? You've talked about a number of them. You referenced the sanctity of data, the importance of that. You alluded to IoT as an important part of the future transformation ahead towards digital and continuing to innovate around digital technologies. Whether it's further explanation of some of those or additional topics that are of particular interest to you, what are some of those trends that excite you as you look to the future?
Yeah, I'll talk a little bit about those technologies, I think related to the industry that I'm in. But I like to look at, we tend to talk about these things kind of in pieces, and I like to think of them as more of an ecosystem of technologies. My industry, the supply chain industry, freight, logistics, transportation has many opportunities, but just like many other industries, the technology is really enhancing a lot of the workflows, and has been enhancing those workflows for decades. Any industry that's focused on the movement of goods, the manufacturing of goods, really is workflow driven. And so, for many companies, you've got past technology solutions that are now yielding this wealth of data. It's informing strategic direction for many of the operating units. Then you start rolling in things like IoT devices. Well, those are enhancing workflows and touch points with real-time analytics and data that previously wasn't available or was cost prohibitive to capture. Then you've got recent advancements in AI and machine learning, and those are impacting daily operations. And then I think about things like quantum that will continue to revolutionize our industry by making previously unsolvable problems solvable. We've actually got algorithms that we've developed that we're waiting to run on that type of technology that takes days or months to run. And so we're looking forward to be able to use those type of technologies. So, my view is that there's an array of technologies out there that are emerging. You've got to understand them, where they fit. But really, the other view that we have is that we know that the technology is going to be a part of every innovative solution today. And the failure to embrace innovation is going to leave companies vulnerable to disruptions that we view would be devastating. And the supply chain industry is no different. Innovation and technology, in our views, aren't just key to navigating the supply chain, logistics, transportation. It's a key to surviving and thriving in it. So I don't want to point to any particular technology. I'd say we've got people looking at a lot of them, if not all of the ones that are really related to our industry.
Well, Michael, I really appreciate you sharing perspectives from the remarkable career you've had over 27 years now at ArcBest, the various roles that you've had, your current purview, again, a fascinating slice of the company that you're responsible for, a company that's been remarkably successful, a stock that's opened more than 200% just in the past year alone. So certainly the market would offer positive feedback for the direction you and the team have put forward. But I really do appreciate you sharing your perspectives, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Peter. Really enjoyed speaking with you.